Have you ever wondered how two nations can go from being, well, bitter enemies to the closest of allies? In this explainer, we are going to dive into the really fascinating, ever-changing relationship between Britain and the United States. It's a story that's not just interesting in its own right, but will also help you absolutely master key concepts for your AMC course.
So let's start with this really powerful idea from the historian Eric Hobsbawm. This is going to be our intellectual hook for today, because it perfectly captures this idea that national identity is often built not on what a country is, but what it is not. So hang on to that thought as we explore the story of the US and Britain. Now, let's place this topic right where it belongs in your AMC program. We're in Theme 1, Identité et Échanges, Identities and Exchanges. And we're going to be looking specifically at how stereotypes and cultural clichés, what the program calls Stéréotypes et clichés culturelles, really shape how we see the world. You know, understanding this framework is absolutely key for your analysis. So, all of this leads us to our big question for today. We're going to explore how nations use stereotypes to define themselves, and, maybe more importantly, how those images can completely flip over time. And to do that, we're going to use the really complex relationship between Britain and the United States back in the 19th century as our main case study.
And here's our game plan for today. It's a clear roadmap so you can structure your understanding and, of course, your notes. We'll start with the conflict, then we'll move to a new ideology, we'll see the transformation, we'll work on some really important exam skills, and finally, we'll connect it all to the world we live in today.
Okay, let's dive right into our first section. You see, to understand how Britain and the US became brothers, we first have to get our heads around why they were such bitter enemies to begin with. We're about to see how conflict and opposition are actually essential tools for forging a national identity. First things first, let's get our key terms straight. A stereotype, it's a fixed, oversimplified image, right? Now, for our analysis, this specific term heterostereotype is really useful. It sounds complicated, I know, but it just means a negative idea that one group has about an outside group, an other. And that's exactly what was going on between Britain and America. This timeline here shows the key moments that really drove a wedge between Britain and the new United States. So, you've got the American Revolution, which creates the initial break. Then the War of 1812, which just deepens the hostility. And by the 1830s, this whole division was cemented in their culture, especially through literature. This made creating an other not just handy, but politically necessary for both sides. And this slide just illustrates brilliantly how stereotypes are a two-way street. To define themselves, each nation basically created a negative mirror image of the other. The British saw Americans as uncultured, brutish, a total rejection of tradition. And at the same time, Americans saw the British as aristocratic and oppressive, pretty much everything their new republic was fighting against. Now, let's look at a concrete example from a literary giant, Charles Dickens. When he visited America, he was a huge celebrity, but his writings afterwards, they were scathing. This quote from his American notes was incredibly influential. It helps cement this really negative image of Americans for a massive British audience. Okay, so this is where you start thinking like an analyst for your exam. This is exactly the kind of question you should be asking yourselves. It's not enough just to see the stereotype. You have to dig in and analyze how the language itself builds that representation. What is Dickens actually doing with his words here? Right, let's break this down. He uses loaded words like scoundrels and buffoons. That's a direct attack on their morality. Then words like greedy and corrupt, he's questioning their ethics. And by mentioning manners and hygiene, he's basically saying they're uncivilized. But the real key phrase here is almost universally. This is a classic tool of stereotyping. It's a sweeping generalization that just erases any individuality. This is a critical skill for you to have. Okay, let's move on to our second section. We're going to see how this whole dynamic of opposition was completely turned on its head by a powerful new idea that swept across the Atlantic.
So, in the mid to late 19th century, this racial ideology, known as Anglo-Saxonism, became hugely popular. And it argued that, far from being opposites, the British and Americans were actually fundamentally the same. They were part of a superior race that was destined for global leadership.
So, and this is the crucial point. This idea created a massive contradiction. It flew directly in the face of the other stereotype that had defined both nations for almost 100 years. I mean, if they were from the same superior stock, how could they possibly be enemies? This forced a complete rethink of national identity on both sides of the ocean. And this brings us to a major historical shift in the late 19th century, a period that historians actually call the Great Rapprochement, which is just a fancy way of saying a grand coming together of the two nations. And out of this ideological shift, A powerful new public image was born: the brother. The despised other was replaced by the idea of a long-lost family member. All of a sudden, the two nations were being framed as part of a single Anglo-Saxon family tree, destined to shape the world together.
And you can see this new brother idea just popping up everywhere in popular culture at the time. You had hit songs that reframed the American Revolution as just a simple family squabble. Magazine covers, like this one from Puck, showed John Bull and Uncle Sam as powerful allies. This idea wasn't just stuck in political speeches, it was in the music people were singing and the images they were seeing every single day.
Okay, let's just pause for a moment to focus on a really crucial skill for your assessments: how to take all these ideas and build them into a clear, convincing, analytical paragraph. A simple but incredibly effective method is PEE. That stands for point, evidence, and explanation. It's easy. First, you state your main argument, your point. Then you provide specific evidence from the source. And finally, you explain how that evidence proves your point, analyzing the language. This structure makes sure your analysis is always logical and well-supported.
Let's look at a perfect model paragraph that applies this method. It starts with the point. The other stereotype was replaced by that of a brother. Simple, clear. Then it gives the evidence. The song John Bull and Uncle Sam is an example. Finally, and this is the most important part, it gives the explanation, analyzing how the lyrics transform political rivalry into a shared global destiny. See? PEE. This is how you build a strong, well-supported argument. You can use this exact method in your exam.
All right, let's bring everything together. We'll summarize our key findings and, connect them to the world you're actually living in today.
So, to wrap it all up, we've answered our guiding question. We've seen how national identities are often built against an other using stereotypes as the main tools. But crucially, we've learned these images are not permanent. The powerful idea of Anglo-Saxonism completely rewired the relationship and transformed an enemy into a brother.
And now, a final thought to take away with you. We've been analyzing a historical process, but the mechanisms behind it, they're timeless. Just look around you. How is the idea of an other used today to create a sense of us? Where do you see these same patterns? In social media, in the news, in the films you watch? This isn't just history, you see. It's a fundamental process of how identity and representation are constructed right here, right now.